during my graduation dinner, everyone was laughing until Grandma grinned at me and said, "I'm happy the $1,500 I send you every month is helping." I hesitated, glanced around, and responded, "I never received any money." Everyone gradually turned to stare at my parents, who stayed deathly silent. Grandma put her plate down. At that moment, it began. Imagine graduating college, finally feeling like you're stepping into your own, only for your entire world to shatter. One innocent question from my grandma revealed a devastating secret. My parents, the people who were supposed to protect me, had stolen nearly $100,000 meant for my future. Can you even begin to comprehend that kind of betrayal? That night, at my graduation dinner, everyone was laughing. It was supposed to be a celebration. But then Grandma Vivian, with her warm, genuine smile, turned to me. "I'm so glad the $1,500 I send you every month helped, sweetheart," she said, her voice full of pride. My heart literally stopped. "What money?" I paused, looking around the table. "Grandma," I said slowly, "I never got any money." The air in that room just froze. Every single person at that table slowly, agonizingly, turned to look at my parents. They were utterly silent, their faces draining of all color. Grandma Vivian, the matriarch, quietly set her plate down. And that, my friends, was when the tea began to spill. See, money had always just disappeared in my life. Every summer job paycheck, every birthday card with a 20 tucked inside, every scholarship meant to ease my burden. All of it vanished into what my parents vaguely called family expenses. I'd learned to live small, to apologize for needing new shoes, to work double shifts between classes while my stomach growled. Until that moment at my graduation dinner, when my grandmother's innocent words shattered everything. The silence that followed was deafening. The sheer terror on my parents' faces said it all. $72,000, just from those monthly payments during college, stolen from me by the very people who were supposed to protect me. For years, I'd believed I was the burden. Now, in a single gut-wrenching instant, I realized I'd been the bank. And as I looked into my grandmother's eyes, seeing her quiet fury ignite, I understood something deep in my soul. Some betrayals can't be forgiven. Some debts must be paid in full. I remember smoothing down the front of my graduation gown for the 100th time that evening, stealing glances at my reflection in the hallway mirror. For years of late nights, ramen dinners, and scraping by had led to this moment. My parents' voices floated from the dining room, my mother's familiar, performative hostess laugh reaching my ears. "Call us, sweetheart, everyone's waiting," she'd called out, that sugary tone she reserved for company. I took a deep breath and stepped into the dining room. Our modest home had been transformed for the occasion. Fresh flowers I knew we couldn't afford. The good china that only appeared when my grandmother visited. Even a "Congratulations, graduate" banner hung above the fireplace. My father, Porter, was pouring wine, engaging my uncle in conversation about property values. My mother, Elaine, fluttered between guests with practiced grace, her pearl earrings catching the light. And then there was Grandma Vivian. Unlike the others, she rose immediately when I entered, her eyes bright with genuine pride. "There she is," Vivian announced, crossing the room with surprising speed for her 72 years. My brilliant granddaughter. Her embrace felt different from my mother's perfunctory hugs. Warmer, tighter, sincere. Vivian pulled back, holding me at arm's length to take me in. "You look exactly like my mother on her graduation day," she said, her voice thick with emotion. Strong, ready for anything. My mother appeared at my side then, placing a hand on my shoulder with just enough pressure to create distance between Vivian and me. "Mother, you're going to wrinkle her gown before we take pictures." Vivian's eyes flashed, but her smile remained. "Some things are worth wrinkling for, Elaine." The dynamic between them had always been tense, though neither would acknowledge it openly. Vivian lived 3 hours away in her small Victorian home, the one she'd refused to sell even after my grandfather passed. She visited rarely, usually for holidays and special occasions, each visit marked by my mother's anxiety and my father's strategic absences. Dinner progressed with the expected small talk. My father stood to offer a toast, champagne flute raised high. "To Kala, who has made us proud by graduating with honors," he said, his practiced smile not quite reaching his eyes. "Though we always knew she would succeed." My mother nodded enthusiastically. "Despite the financial challenges, we always told you, didn't we, Kala, that no matter how tight things got, we'd find a way." I smiled weakly, remembering the countless times I'd heard those exact words. We can't afford that right now, Kala. Maybe next semester. You know how tight things are. It had been the soundtrack of my college years. The reason I'd worked 2 jobs while carrying a full course load. The explanation for why I couldn't join my friends on spring break. Why I couldn't afford therapy when panic attacks started during sophomore year. Why I wore the same 3 outfits in rotation until they frayed at the seams. Kala has always been so understanding about our situation, my mother continued, reaching for my hand across the table. So mature about the sacrifices. Vivian set her fork down with deliberate care. Sacrifices? My father cleared his throat. Well, Mother Vivian, not everyone has unlimited resources. We've always been honest with Kala about our financial situation. Honest, Vivian repeated, her tone neutral, but her eyes sharp. She turned to me with unusual intensity. Kala, the monthly deposits, the $1,500 I've been sending you throughout college, has it helped with those sacrifices? The table went silent. My glass froze halfway to my lips as I processed her words. What money? I asked slowly, the question hanging in the air like smoke. The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. My eyes darted to my parents, who had gone completely still. My mother's face drained of color, while my father's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. The $1,500 I've been sending every month since you started college, Vivian clarified, her eyes never leaving mine. For expenses, emergencies, and so you wouldn't have to work yourself to exhaustion while studying. The silence stretched, broken only by the sound of my uncle awkwardly setting down his utensils. There must be some misunderstanding, my mother finally said, her laugh brittle and false. Mother, perhaps we should discuss this in private. I've never received any money from Grandma, I said, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. Not once. Vivian's expression hardened as she turned to face my parents. Elaine, what is she talking about? My father recovered first, his business smile sliding into place. There must be some banking mix-up. I'm sure we can sort this out. Elaine handles the accounts. I've kept every receipt, Vivian cut in, her voice quiet but firm. Every transfer confirmation. For 4 years. The realization hit me like a physical blow. For years. That was $72,000. While I'd been eating ramen and working night shifts at the campus coffee shop. While I'd been turning down medical care and social opportunities. While I'd been drowning in guilt every time I spent money on basic necessities. You said we were struggling, I whispered, looking at my mother. You said you were taking extra shifts to help me stay in school. My mother's hand trembled as she reached for her wine glass. We were saving it for your future. For emergencies. What emergencies? I demanded, my voice rising. The emergency when my car broke down and I couldn't get to class for 2 weeks because you said you couldn't help? The emergency when I needed a root canal and you told me to take ibuprofen until summer break. Vivian placed her napkin on the table and stood with quiet dignity. I think we've had enough celebration for tonight. Kala, would you walk me to my car? My father stood abruptly. Mother Vivian, please. Let's not ruin Kala's special day with a misunderstanding. It's not a misunderstanding, Vivian replied coldly. And the only ones ruining anything are you and my daughter. She turned to me, her voice softening. Kala, I'll be at the Parkside Hotel downtown, room 312. Come see me when you're ready to talk. As she walked out, the silence she left behind was deafening. My cousins stared at their plates. My uncle muttered something about family matters, while my aunt suggested they should leave. I remained frozen, watching the family celebration disintegrate around me, suddenly aware that everything I thought I knew about my life, about my parents, might be built on lies. Sleep refused to come that night. I lay in my childhood bedroom, staring at the glow-in-the-dark stars my father had put on the ceiling when I was 10. One of the few happy memories I had with him. The conversation with my parents after everyone left had been brief and unsatisfying. We were protecting you, my mother had insisted, her mascara smudged from crocodile tears. You weren't ready for that kind of money. We were going to give it to you after graduation as a surprise. My father had been more strategic. Your grandmother has always tried to control this family with her money. We were teaching you independence. Independence. The word echoed in my mind as I remembered the nights I'd gone hungry to save for textbooks. The scholarships I'd fought for. The loans I'd taken out despite my parents' assurances they were handling things. By dawn, I was sitting cross-legged on my bed, surrounded by old journals, birthday cards, and letters. I'd started noticing patterns. References to gifts I'd never received, my mother's constant comments about my expensive taste, the guilt trips when I needed new clothes or school supplies. When the first light of morning filtered through my curtains, I dressed quietly and slipped out of the house before my parents woke. The drive to the Parkside Hotel took only 15 minutes, but it felt like crossing a boundary into new territory. Vivian answered her door immediately, already dressed in a simple blue blouse and slacks, her silver hair neatly pinned back. She didn't seem surprised to see me. "I've been up since 5, she said, ushering me in. Some habits never die, even in retirement. The hotel room was modest but comfortable. Vivian had already ordered breakfast. "Enough for 2. I thought you might come early," she explained, pouring me coffee. "You have questions. I have answers. But first, eat something. You look exhausted." I picked at a croissant while Vivian sat across from me, her posture perfect, but her eyes gentle. "I should have checked on you directly," she began, regret evident in her voice. "I trusted Elaine when she said you were too busy with studies to talk much. That was my mistake. How long have you been sending money?" I asked, the coffee bitter on my tongue. Vivian sighed. "Since you started college. $1,500 every month. But that's not all." She reached for her purse and removed a leather portfolio. "I also sent $500 monthly throughout your high school years for your college fund," I was told. My hands began to shake. "That's another $24,000. "Yes, nearly $100,000 total meant for you." Vivian opened the portfolio, revealing meticulously organized bank statements. "I've always kept records. Your grandfather taught me that." I stared at the papers, each one a confirmation of my parents' betrayal. "Why didn't you ever mention it when we talked?" "We rarely talked, Kala. That's part of the problem." Vivian's voice sharpened. "Every time I called, Elaine said you were studying or working. When I sent birthday cards or Christmas gifts with checks, she'd tell me later how you'd spent them. I believed her." She paused, her hands clasping together tightly. "I should have pushed harder. I failed you." "No," I said firmly. "They failed me. They lied to both of us." Vivian nodded slowly. "Yes, and I think we need to understand how deep this goes." After breakfast, we made a plan. I would check my bank records and gather evidence. Vivian would consult her attorney about legal options. We would meet again the next day. As I drove back to my apartment near campus, my mind raced with memories. The time my mother claimed my birthday check from Vivian had bounced, making me feel too ashamed to thank my grandmother. The college trip to Europe I'd been forced to decline because my parents said we couldn't afford the deposit, despite Vivian's money supposedly waiting in my account. The winter my heat was shut off because I couldn't pay the bill while I worked double shifts between classes. At my apartment, I pulled out my laptop and logged into my bank account, the one my mother had helped me set up when I turned 18. I scrolled through years of transactions, searching for any trace of Vivian's generosity. Nothing. With shaking hands, I called the bank. "I need to know if there are any other accounts associated with my social security number," I said after verifying my identity. "I see 3 accounts," the representative replied. "Your checking and savings that you're currently viewing online, and a joint account with Elaine Winter." My stomach dropped. I never opened a joint account with my mother. "The paperwork was completed when you were 17, according to our records. Your mother has signatory authority." I ended the call and immediately texted my cousin Marin. We'd been close as children but had drifted apart in recent years, something I now suspected might have been deliberate on my parents' part. "Need to talk. It's important. About money and our family." Her response came within minutes. Finally. "Figure it out. Call me." Marin's voice was familiar, yet distant, when I called. "I wondered when you'd realize what was happening," she said without preamble. "Aunt Elaine and Uncle Porter did the same thing with my college fund from Grandpa before he died. They managed it until there was nothing left." "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked, hurt mingling with anger. "I tried once. You defended them so fiercely that Aunt Elaine convinced everyone I was jealous and lying." Marin's voice was matter of fact, without bitterness. "After that, my parents wouldn't let me spend time with you unsupervised. Said I was a bad influence." The conversation with Marin opened another wound. The realization that my isolation hadn't been accidental. Friends who drifted away after meeting my parents. Relatives who stopped inviting me to events. The subtle ways my mother had criticized anyone who got too close. That evening, I received an email from Vivian with a notarized letter from her bank confirming all transfers made to my parents over the years. Nearly $100,000, just as she'd said. The evidence was irrefutable. I drove to my parents' house the next morning, determined to confront them directly. My mother answered the door in her bathrobe, feigning surprise. "Kala, we thought you'd gone back to your apartment. Come in, I'll make coffee." My father sat at the kitchen table, newspaper in hand, as if it were any normal day. He lowered it slightly when I entered, his expression carefully neutral. "I know about the joint account," I said without preamble. "I know you forged my signature when I was 17. My mother's hand stilled on the coffee pot. "That's a serious accusation, Kala." "It's not an accusation. It's a fact." The bank confirmed it. My father folded his newspaper deliberately. "We did what any responsible parents would do. You were a minor. We established an account for your future. Where's the money?" I demanded. "Grandma's money." "My money." My mother's face transformed, her expression hardening. "After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us? With accusations? Where do you think your tuition came from? Your apartment? Your car?" "I paid for my apartment with my jobs," I countered. "I got scholarships for tuition, and the car was from Uncle Julian. You just put it in your name because of insurance rates." "You're being ungrateful," my mother said, her voice rising. "We sacrificed everything for you." "What did you sacrifice?" I asked, my voice deadly quiet. "Your trips to Mexico every winter? The kitchen renovation last year? Dad's new car?" My father stood, his chair scraping against the floor. "That's enough. You don't understand adult responsibilities, Kala. We had expenses. Investments. Stop lying." I shouted, surprising even myself with the force of my anger. "Just stop. I have the bank records. I have Grandma's notarized statements. I know what you did." My mother's face crumpled into tears. The same performance I'd seen countless times when she wanted to end a difficult conversation. "How can you do this to us after all we've done? You're breaking my heart." For the first time, I recognized the manipulation in her tears. The way she'd always twisted situations to make herself the victim. How many times had I comforted her when I was the one who had been wronged? "I'm going to find out exactly what happened to that money," I said, backing toward the door. "And I'm going to make sure Grandma knows everything." My father's expression darkened. "Don't threaten us, Kala. We're still your parents." "Not anymore," I whispered, the words burning my throat. "Not after this." I left their house feeling both shattered and strangely free. In my car, I found a text from Vivian. *, my attorney will see us at 2 p.m. I'll pick you up at your apartment. We'll face this together. *, for the first time in years, I felt like I wasn't alone. The attorney's office was housed in a converted Victorian downtown, its interior warm with wood paneling and leather chairs. Mr. Harlow, Vivian's attorney for over 20 years, was a slim man with silver-rimmed glasses and a deliberate way of speaking that immediately put me at ease. "What we're looking at here," he said after reviewing our documents, "is potentially financial fraud and grand theft. The forgery of your signature on the joint account when you were a minor is particularly troubling." Vivian sat beside me, her hand occasionally squeezing mine when my voice faltered as I explained my financial history. "The psychological component is equally concerning," Mr. Harlow continued. "What you're describing, the isolation from family members, the guilt manipulation, the controlled narrative about money, these are hallmarks of financial abuse." The word abuse landed like a physical blow. I never applied that term to my upbringing, despite the constant anxiety, the walking on eggshells, the crushing guilt whenever I needed something. "Can we prove it?" Vivian asked, her voice steady, but her fingers trembling slightly against mine. "With what you've provided, we have a strong start," Mr. Harlow confirmed. "Bank records don't lie. The notarized confirmation of your transfers, Miss Winter, establishes intent. Now we need to trace where the money went." As we left the attorney's office, Vivian suggested dinner at a small restaurant nearby. Over soup and sandwiches, she watched me with concern. "You're very quiet," she observed. "Having second thoughts?" I shook my head. "Just processing. Remembering things differently now." "Like what?" "Like when I was 16 and wanted to attend a summer writing program at Northwestern. Mom said we couldn't afford it, even though I'd earned a partial scholarship. She cried about how embarrassed she was, that she couldn't provide opportunities for me. I pushed my soup bowl away. I wrote a letter declining the scholarship, apologizing for wasting their time." Vivian's expression darkened. That was the summer I sent an extra $3,000 specifically for Kala's writing program. Elaine told me you'd changed your mind about attending. There were so many things like that, I whispered. School trips, doctor visits, even clothes. I wore the same jeans until they had holes because Mom would make comments about how expensive my taste was, how tight money was that month. While they renovated their bathroom and took cruises, Vivian added, her tone bitter. I blame myself, I admitted, for wanting too much, for being a burden. Vivian reached across the table, her eyes fierce. You were a child, their child, never a burden. The next day, I met with Miss Reynolds, my high school English teacher. She'd always taken a special interest in my writing, often giving me extra books and sometimes even lunch money, which I'd accepted with burning shame. I'm not entirely surprised, she said when I explained why I wanted to meet. I called Child Protective Services once during your junior year. I stared at her in shock. You did what? Miss Reynolds nodded gravely. You came to school in December wearing only a light jacket. When I asked about a winter coat, you said you didn't want to stress your parents out by asking for one. You were working at that grocery store after school but seemed afraid to spend money on yourself. She sighed. CPS visited, but your mother was very convincing. Said you were going through a dramatic phase. Nothing came of it. That evening, Vivian introduced me to Uncle Julian, my father's brother, whom I barely knew. He'd been largely absent from family gatherings for years, something my father had explained away as Julian's instability. Julian met us at Vivian's hotel, his resemblance to my father striking despite his more casual appearance and genuine smile. Porter cut me out years ago, he explained, accepting the coffee Vivian offered, after I confronted him about some financial irregularities in our mother's estate. What kind of irregularities? I asked. Julian's expression hardened. Money disappeared. Accounts were mysteriously emptied. Porter had power of attorney. And when I questioned certain transactions, I became persona non grata. He looked at me with sympathy. I'm sorry I wasn't there for you, Kala. I tried to stay in touch, but your parents returned my letters and gifts. They did what? I whispered. Classic isolation tactic, Vivian murmured. Cut off potential allies. Julian leaned forward, his expression serious. Listen to me, Kala. They'll do anything to maintain their image. When you confront them legally, and you should, they'll cry. They'll plead. They'll promise change. Don't trust their apologies. That night, as if on cue, my phone lit up with messages from my mother. Sweet, conciliatory texts, promising explanations, inviting me to dinner, to work things out as a family. I showed the messages to Vivian, who was staying an extra week in town to support me. Don't go alone, she warned. They'll outnumber you, manipulate the conversation. If you want to hear them out, I'll go with you. My boyfriend, Ree, called while I was with Vivian. We'd been dating for 8 months. He was kind and stable, if somewhat conventional. When I explained the situation, his response left me cold. Are you sure you want to go through with this? He asked. Legal battles with family can drag on for years. Maybe they really were trying to protect you in their own way. They stole from me, I said, disbelieving his response. They lied to me my entire life. I know, and that's wrong, he backpedaled. I just wonder if it's worth all this drama. Families are complicated. After we hung up, Vivian found me crying on the balcony of her hotel room. Ree thinks I should let it go, I explained, wiping my eyes. That it's not worth the drama. Vivian's expression was compassionate but firm. When people show you who they're willing to stand beside in a crisis, believe them. She sat next to me, wrapping a blanket around my shoulders. You're not alone in this fight, Kala. I'm here. Julian's here. Your cousin Marin, even your teacher. You have allies. The next day, armed with Julian's advice and Vivian's unwavering support, I agreed to meet my parents, but on neutral ground, at a coffee shop downtown, with Vivian present. My mother's face tightened when she saw my grandmother, but she quickly recovered, reaching for me with outstretched arms. Kala, sweetheart, we've been so worried. I stepped back, avoiding her embrace. I'm here to listen to your explanation. That's all. My father cleared his throat, glancing nervously at the neighboring tables. Could we discuss this somewhere more private? No, Vivian and I said simultaneously. We sat at a corner table, my parents across from us. I placed my phone between us, the recording app visibly running. For my records, I explained. My mother's smile faltered. Is that really necessary? Yes, I said simply. Now explain where my money went. What followed was a master class in deflection. My father talked about family finances, and shared resources. My mother dabbed at non-existent tears while mentioning her sacrifices and maternal concern about my financial responsibility. "So you admit you took the money?" I pressed. "We managed it," my father corrected, "as any responsible parents would. You didn't know how to handle large sums." "How would you know?" I countered. "You never gave me the chance." "We put it in a family joint account," he said, the admission slipping out in his frustration. "For emergencies and your future." I leaned forward. "Where is it now?" My parents exchanged glances. "There were expenses," my mother began vaguely. "What expenses?" "Your tuition. I had scholarships and loans. The car. Uncle Julian paid for that." My father's composure cracked slightly. "We're your parents, Kala. We don't owe you an itemized receipt for every decision we made on your behalf." Vivian, who had been silently observing, finally spoke. "Actually, legally, you do. Especially since you forged her signature and diverted funds specifically designated for her use." My mother turned on Vivian, her mask slipping completely. "You've always undermined my parenting. Always thought you knew better. Well, look what you've done now. Turn my own daughter against me." "You did that yourself, Elaine," Vivian replied calmly. I stood, gathering my phone and bag. "This meeting is over. My attorney will be in touch." As we walked away, my mother called after me, her voice breaking dramatically. "Kala, please. We're still your family." Vivian's arm wrapped around my shoulders as we reached the door. "Family doesn't steal from family," she said loud enough for my parents to hear. "And family certainly doesn't manipulate a child into believing she's a burden." Outside in the bright afternoon sun, I took my first deep breath in what felt like days. "What now?" Vivian's smile was both sad and determined. "Now we make sure they never do this to anyone else. And we build something better for you, something honest." For the first time since my graduation dinner, I felt something like hope blooming in my chest. The road ahead would be difficult, but at least now I could see it clearly, and I wasn't walking it alone. The morning I filed the formal legal complaint, something shifted inside me. Standing beside Vivian in the county courthouse, watching as the clerk stamped and processed our paperwork, I felt a strange sense of calm replacing the storm that had raged within me for weeks. "How do you feel?" Vivian asked as we descended the courthouse steps. "Like I'm finally fighting back," I said, surprised at the steadiness in my voice. The complaint was comprehensive: financial fraud, forgery, theft by conversion. Mr. Harlow had helped us gather everything: bank statements, notarized letters from Vivian confirming the intended purpose of her gifts, testimony from Julian about previous patterns of financial misappropriation, even a statement from Miss Reynolds about her concerns during my high school years. "They won't take this lying down," Vivian warned as we drove back to her hotel. She'd extended her stay indefinitely, moving from the Parkside to a long-term rental apartment downtown. "Elaine knows how to play the victim. She learned from the best. Her father was the same way." "I'm ready," I said, though my stomach twisted at the thought of what was coming. News traveled quickly in our small town. By that evening, my phone was buzzing with texts from family, friends, and distant relatives. Some offering support, others demanding explanations. The story had begun to spread. Kala Winter was suing her parents for fraud. Vivian's decision to publicly distance herself from my parents added fuel to the fire. At her regular bridge club, when asked about the situation, she'd been direct. "My daughter and son-in-law stole nearly $100,000 meant for my granddaughter's education and welfare. I won't be associated with thieves, family or not." The fallout was immediate. Invitations to community events that had always included my parents suddenly specified Vivian and me instead. Friends they'd cultivated for years began to question their own financial dealings with them. My father's business associates started asking uncomfortable questions. 3 days after we filed, my mother appeared unannounced in my apartment, her eyes red-rimmed and her hands shaking. "Please," she begged from my doorway. "You have to drop this. You're ruining everything." I held the doorframe, blocking her entry. "Like you ruined my chance at a normal college experience? At medical treatment when I needed it? At opportunities that could have changed my life? I was protecting you," she insisted, her voice rising to that familiar pitch that had always made me back down in the past. "Porter was the one who took the money. I just went along with it because I was afraid of what he would do." The lie was so transparent, it almost made me laugh. "Mom, I've seen the bank records. You were the primary signatory on the account. You made most of the withdrawals." Her face crumpled, tears flowing freely now. You have no idea what it's like to be married to someone like your father. The pressure, the control. Stop, I said firmly. I'm not doing this with you. Not anymore. Everything goes through our attorneys now. As she opened her mouth to protest, Vivian's car pulled into the parking lot. My grandmother approached with purposeful strides, her expression hardening at the sight of her daughter. Elaine, she said coolly, this is inappropriate. Kala has made it clear she doesn't want direct contact. My mother whirled toward Vivian, her grief transforming instantly to rage. You did this. You turned her against us. You've always been jealous of my relationship with Kala. Vivian didn't flinch. What relationship, Elaine? The one where you manipulated and stole from her? Where you isolated her from anyone who might have helped her? That relationship. You have no right. I have every right, Vivian interrupted, her voice like steel. You robbed your daughter of her dignity. That can't be undone with tears and excuses. My mother stared at her, mouth open in shock. Vivian had always been somewhat differential to her daughter in the past, avoiding direct confrontation. This new, fierce Vivian was a revelation. I'm done with you, Vivian continued. As of yesterday, I've changed my will. You and Porter are no longer beneficiaries of anything I leave behind. It will all go to Kala and to charities that support victims of family financial abuse. My mother's face went white. You can't do that. It's already done. Vivian took my arm gently. Come inside, Kala. We have dinner plans to discuss. That night, Ree called to tell me he couldn't continue our relationship. It's too much, he said, his voice strained. The court case, the family drama. I didn't sign up for this, Kala. Though I'd seen it coming, the finality of his abandonment still stung. After we hung up, I found Vivian in the kitchen of her rental apartment making tea. Ree is gone, I said simply. She nodded, unsurprised. Some people can only walk with you when the path is smooth. The next morning, Mr. Harlow called. The judge had set a date for an emergency hearing. My parents were attempting to have the case dismissed before discovery could begin. They're getting nervous, he explained. This is good for us. It means they know we have a strong case. The hearing was scheduled for the following week. In the meantime, Mr. Harlow suggested I retrieve any remaining personal documents from my parents' house. Take someone with you, he advised. Not your grandmother. She's too emotionally involved. Perhaps your cousin or your uncle. Julian agreed to accompany me. We arrived at my childhood home on a Tuesday afternoon when I knew my parents would be at work. Using the key I still had, we entered quietly. The familiar scent of my mother's potpourri bringing back memories I now viewed through a different lens. We should focus on financial records, Julian said as we stood in the entryway. Tax returns, bank statements, investment documents. I nodded, leading him to my father's home office. The filing cabinet was locked, but Julian had come prepared with a small toolkit. Your father and I grew up in the same house, he explained as he worked on the lock. He hasn't changed his hiding places since we were kids. Inside the cabinet, we found a trove of documentation, not just about my accounts, but about similar situations with other family members. A folder labeled Marin Trust contained transfer records from an account established by my grandfather for my cousin's education. Another file labeled JW Estate held papers relating to my grandmother's sister Judith, who had died 10 years earlier. They've been doing this for years, Julian muttered, his expression darkening as he flipped through the pages. To multiple family members. We photographed everything, careful not to disturb the original arrangement. As we prepared to leave, I made a detour to my old bedroom, wanting to retrieve a few childhood keepsakes. The room had been transformed. My twin bed was gone, replaced by an exercise bike and weight bench. My bookshelves had been removed, the walls repainted. There was no trace of me left. They were planning to erase me even before all this, I realized aloud, my voice echoing in the unfamiliar space. Julian placed a hand on my shoulder. They can change the room, Kala. They can't erase who you are. The day of the hearing arrived with a sense of inevitability. The courthouse was busier than I'd expected, with several familiar faces in the corridor. Neighbors, former teachers, even my mother's bridge club friends. Vivian greeted them with quiet dignity, while I tried to calm the butterflies in my stomach. My parents arrived with their attorney, a sharp-featured man named Bennett, who specialized in defending white-collar criminals. My mother was dressed in muted colors, her makeup minimal, playing the role of the wounded parent. My father looked grim but composed in his best suit. Inside the courtroom, Judge Levinson, a stern woman in her 60s, reviewed our filings with methodical precision. After the attorneys presented their initial arguments, she looked directly at me. Miss Winter, I understand you wish to make a statement. While unusual at this stage, given the nature of this case, I'll allow it. I rose on shaking legs, feeling Vivian's encouraging presence behind me. The statement I'd prepared seemed inadequate now. Faced with the reality of my parents sitting just feet away, their expressions carefully neutral. Taking a deep breath, I began to speak. Your Honor, this case isn't just about money, though nearly $100,000 is certainly significant. It's about trust and its violation. It's about parents who systematically lied to their child while stealing opportunities that were rightfully hers. My voice grew stronger as I continued. For years, I believed we were struggling financially. I worked multiple jobs while studying full-time. I went without medical care. I missed opportunities that could have shaped my future differently. All while my parents used money designated for my welfare to renovate their home, take vacations, and maintain appearances in our community. The courtroom was silent as I spoke about the forgery, the hidden account, the pattern of isolation and manipulation, the evidence of similar behavior toward other family members. Through it all, I kept my voice steady, my eyes occasionally meeting those of my father, who couldn't maintain my gaze. I don't take this action lightly, Your Honor. I swallowed hard before finishing. But the systematic deception I experienced wasn't the result of a single bad decision or a temporary lapse in judgment. It was a years-long campaign to control me through financial manipulation while stealing what was meant to help me build my future. No child should have to sue their parents for basic honesty. But no parent should steal from their child while convincing her she's a burden. When I sat down, the silence lingered for several seconds before Judge Levinson cleared her throat. Thank you, Miss Winter. She turned to my parents' attorney. Mr. Bennett, does your side wish to respond? Bennett rose smoothly. Your Honor, we believe this is a family misunderstanding that has been tragically blown out of proportion. The Winters were simply managing their daughter's finances with her best interests at heart. We'd like to propose a settlement conference rather than proceeding with what could be a lengthy and painful public process. Judge Levinson's gaze was piercing. A settlement offer at this stage suggests your clients recognize the merit of the claims against them, Mr. Bennett. Not at all, Your Honor. It simply reflects their desire to heal their family without unnecessary litigation. The judge studied my parents for a long moment before turning back to me. Miss Winter, are you interested in settlement discussions? Before I could answer, Mr. Harlow stood. Your Honor, my client has attempted informal resolution multiple times. The respondents have not acknowledged wrongdoing, nor provided a full accounting of the misappropriated funds. We believe formal discovery is necessary before any meaningful settlement could be reached. Judge Levinson nodded. I agree. Motion to dismiss denied. Discovery will proceed, and I'm ordering a forensic accounting of all relevant accounts. She fixed my parents with a stern look. The evidence presented today suggests a troubling pattern of behavior that merits thorough investigation. We will reconvene in 60 days. Outside the courthouse, reporters from the local paper had gathered. Vivian stepped forward, shielding me from their questions as we made our way to the car. You did beautifully, she said once we were driving away. Your words were powerful because they were true. For the first time since graduation night, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. The road ahead would be difficult, but I had finally found my voice. The small one-bedroom apartment I rented with the initial restitution funds wasn't much, a converted space above a bookstore downtown, but it was mine. Every decision, from the second-hand furniture to the color of the shower curtain, was made without questioning whether I deserved it, without guilt about the cost, without anyone else's approval. Vivian visited often, bringing plants for my windowsills and books for my shelves. We were building a relationship that should have existed years ago, unfiltered by my parents' interference. I found these while cleaning out some storage boxes, she said one afternoon, placing a stack of photo albums on my coffee table. Pictures of you as a baby, before things got complicated with your parents. We sat together on my worn sofa, turning pages filled with images I'd never seen. Vivian holding me in the hospital. My first birthday celebration at her house. A Christmas where she dressed as Santa. They kept these from me, I said, tracing a photo of Vivian pushing me on a swing. I never knew we had these moments. They started limiting my access to you when you were about 3, Vivian explained, her voice tinged with old pain. Elaine would make excuses. You're sick. You have plans. You're too tired for visitors. Eventually, the visits became so restricted that I only saw you at major holidays or events they controlled. I leaned against her shoulder, trying to reconcile these images with my limited memories. I always thought you were distant by choice, that you didn't want to be involved in my life. Never, she said firmly. You were always precious to me. I just didn't fight hard enough to stay connected to you. That's my greatest regret. As the legal process continued, I began meeting weekly with Amory Fletcher, a social worker who specialized in supporting survivors of family financial abuse. She was a warm, direct woman in her 40s who had experienced similar manipulation from her own father. What you're feeling is normal, she assured me during our first session. The confusion, the anger, the grief, they're all part of recognizing that your reality was deliberately distorted by people who should have protected you. With Amory's guidance, I started journaling, not just about recent events, but about memories from throughout my childhood. Patterns emerged. My mother's dramatic emotional collapses whenever I asserted independence. My father's cold dismissal of my accomplishments, unless they reflected well on him. The way basic needs became special requests that required elaborate justification. They made me feel like existing was an imposition. I told Amory one day, the realization striking me suddenly. Like I had to earn my right to take up space in the world. She nodded. That's the core of this kind of abuse, making the victim believe they're fundamentally unworthy. It makes them easier to control. One evening, at Amory's suggestion, I wrote a letter to my 14-year-old self, the girl who had begun working weekends at a local grocery store, turning over most of her earnings to her parents for household expenses, while believing her family was on the verge of financial collapse. Dear Kala, at 14, you're not the burden they're making you feel like. The confusion you feel when they praise your independence while making you dependent, that's not your imagination. The guilt you carry for needing new shoes or wanting to join the school trip, you don't deserve that. The way you've learned to make yourself smaller, to need less, to apologize for existing. None of that is because there's something wrong with you. The money you earn that disappears into their hands, it's not really helping with bills. The stories about financial struggle are lies designed to keep you grateful for scraps. The isolation you feel from friends and relatives isn't because you're unlikable or too needy. It's deliberate. I wish I could tell you it gets better soon, but the truth is it will take years before you discover what they've been doing. But when you do, you'll find real support. You'll find your grandmother, the woman they've kept at arm's length your whole life. You'll find your voice. You'll begin to understand that you deserve basic dignity and honesty. You're not alone, even though it feels that way now. Keep those small dreams alive. Keep writing in your hidden journal. Keep believing there might be more to the world than what they show you. One day you'll build a life they can't touch. With love from your future self. Kala. After 2 months in my apartment, Vivian invited me to stay with her at her Victorian home 3 hours away. Just for the summer, she suggested. I'm working on a memoir, and I could use your writing expertise. Plus, it would give us time together without the constant reminders of the court case. The timing felt right. Discovery was ongoing, with forensic accountants tracing the path of Vivian's money through various accounts and investments. My parents had made one more attempt at settlement, offering to repay half the amount with no admission of wrongdoing, which we had rejected outright. They still don't understand, I told Mr. Harlow after reviewing their offer. This isn't just about the money. It's about accountability. Vivian's home was exactly as I'd imagined from the few times she described it. A graceful 2-story Victorian with a wide porch and gardens that bloomed with careful planning. My room overlooked a Japanese maple tree that cast dappled shadows across the hardwood floor. This was meant to be your room whenever you visited, Vivian explained as she helped me unpack. I kept hoping your parents would relent and let you stay for summers or school breaks. For the first time since graduation, I felt truly at peace. Mornings were spent helping Vivian with research for her memoir, a project she'd begun after retiring from teaching English at a local community college. Afternoons were mine for reading, walking, or working on my own writing. Evenings were for long conversations on the porch, filling in the decades of connection we'd missed. One weekend, my cousin Marin drove up to visit, bringing old family photos and stories I'd never heard. We sat in Vivian's sunroom, reconstructing relationships that had been distorted by my parents' narratives. They told me you thought you were too good for the rest of us, Marin admitted, sorting through pictures from a family reunion I barely remembered. That you didn't want to be associated with the countryside of the family. I shook my head, the familiar ache of lost time settling in my chest. They told me you all stopped inviting me because I was difficult and high maintenance. Classic triangulation, Marin said, the term familiar from my sessions with Amory. Keep everyone separated so no one compares notes. We were interrupted by the sound of Vivian's security system chiming. Through the window, I saw my mother's car pulling into the driveway. I didn't know she was coming, I said, tension immediately flooding my body. Vivian appeared in the doorway, her expression grim. She's not invited. I'll handle this. From the sunroom window, I watched as my grandmother met my mother at the front gate. Their conversation was brief, my mother's gestures becoming increasingly agitated while Vivian remained perfectly still. Finally, my mother collapsed into tears, falling to her knees on the walkway in a display I'd seen countless times. The ultimate manipulation when all else failed. Vivian didn't move to comfort her. Instead, she spoke a few final words and turned back toward the house, leaving my mother crumpled on the path. When she returned to the sunroom, Vivian's face was composed, but her hands trembled slightly. What did she want? I asked. Forgiveness, Vivian replied simply. She claims her father has left her, that she's alone and realizes her mistakes. She wants to make amends. Do you believe her? Vivian considered the question carefully. I believe she's suffering. I believe she may even regret some of her actions, but I don't believe she's capable of the kind of honest self-reflection necessary for true change. What did you tell her? That she's no longer welcome at my home. That she'll answer to you, not to me. That we're not her support system anymore. Vivian sat beside me, taking my hand. Was that too harsh? I thought of all the years of manipulation, the carefully constructed lies, the opportunities stolen, the relationships sabotaged. No, I said finally. It was honest. That's all we can be now. 2 weeks later, I received a letter from my mother. 20 pages of flowing handwriting, alternating between self-justification and desperate pleas for reconciliation. She described my father's emotional abuse toward her, his controlling behavior, her fear of standing up to him. She claimed to have saved some of Vivian's money in a separate account for emergencies that my father didn't know about. I read the letter twice, searching for something genuine amid the familiar patterns of manipulation. There were moments of apparent insight, admissions of jealousy toward my relationship with Vivian, acknowledgement of using guilt to control me, but they were embedded in excuses and deflections of responsibility. That evening, I built a small fire in Vivian's backyard fire pit. Marin and Vivian joined me as I placed the letter on the flames, watching as the pages curled and blackened. I'm not angry anymore, I said as the last page disappeared into ash. I'm just done. The next morning, Marin showed me a news article on her phone. My father had been arrested for corporate fraud. Apparently, his creative accounting practices extended beyond family funds. The company where he'd worked as financial controller was pressing charges for embezzlement dating back 5 years. I felt nothing but a dull recognition. Of course he had been stealing elsewhere. The pattern was too ingrained to be limited to family. Are you okay? Vivian asked when I showed her the article. Yes, I said, realizing it was true. Their choices don't define me anymore. As summer turned to fall, the court case reached its conclusion. With the evidence of the forensic accounting and my father's separate legal troubles, my parents agreed to a full settlement. Repayment of all stolen funds, plus damages for emotional distress. The money felt almost incidental now. The real victory was in the truth being acknowledged, in the reconstruction of my understanding of my own life. With part of the settlement, I made a decision that surprised even me. I established a scholarship fund at my alma mater for students who had experienced financial hardship or family estrangement. We named it the Vivian Trust for New Beginnings. Why use my name? Vivian asked when I showed her the paperwork. Because you showed me what real support looks like, I explained. Not control disguised as help, but genuine belief in someone's right to build their own future. The article appeared in the Sunday edition of the local paper 6 months after the settlement was finalized. Graduate uncovers family fraud that went unnoticed for years. The reporter, Andrea Keene, had approached me through Mr. Harlow, asking to share my story as part of a series on financial abuse within families. People don't talk about this, Andrea explained during our interview. They feel too ashamed, too confused about their own experiences. Your willingness to speak openly could help others recognize what's happening to them. The article was thoughtful and detailed, focusing not just on the financial aspects, but on the psychological impact of long-term manipulation. When it was published, I braced myself for backlash, for accusations of family disloyalty or attention-seeking. Instead, my inbox filled with messages from strangers sharing similar experiences. Adult children whose inheritances had been diverted by siblings, grandparents who had been blocked from helping grandchildren, college students whose parents had leveraged financial support to control their choices. "I thought I was the only one," wrote a woman named Tessa. "Reading your story was like seeing my own life reflected back to me for the first time." Dr. Marian Ellison, the head of my university psychology department, called to invite me to speak at a student leadership symposium. "Financial literacy and boundary setting are critical skills we don't teach effectively," she explained. "Your perspective would be invaluable." Standing at the podium in the campus auditorium, facing rows of students not much younger than myself, I felt an unexpected calm. I had brought my journals, the raw, unfiltered record of my journey from confusion to clarity. "Financial abuse doesn't always look like obvious theft," I began, opening to a dog-eared page. "Sometimes it looks like protection that keeps you dependent. Sometimes it sounds like we're struggling while opportunities disappear. Sometimes it feels like constant guilt for having normal needs." I read entries spanning years, from high school anxieties about asking for school supplies to college calculations about whether I could afford antibiotics for strep throat. With each reading, I saw recognition dawn on different faces in the audience. The response was overwhelming. Students lined up afterward to speak with me, many sharing whispered confessions of similar dynamics in their own families. Faculty members asked for resource lists and warning signs. The University Counseling Center requested permission to develop a workshop based on my experiences. What began as a single speaking engagement evolved into a modest platform. I started a podcast called Inheriting Silence, where I interviewed experts on financial abuse and shared stories from survivors who had reclaimed their autonomy. Each episode ended with practical resources, legal options, support groups, financial literacy tools. The podcast gained traction slowly, then caught the attention of a producer at a national radio network. After a feature segment aired nationally, listenership exploded. 6 months into the podcast's run, I received an email that stopped me in my tracks. It was from a 16-year-old girl in Oregon named Lily. "I've been listening to your podcast in secret for months. My parents control everything, my bank account, my summer job money, even the hours I work. They say they're teaching me responsibility, but they never actually let me make decisions. After hearing your story, I asked my guidance counselor for help. She contacted my aunt, who I haven't seen in years because my parents said she was unstable. Turns out my aunt has been trying to reach me all along. She's helping me set up a separate account for my earnings and applying to colleges without my parents knowing. For the first time, I feel like I might have a future they can't control. I don't know if I'll ever be brave enough to confront them like you did, but knowing I'm not crazy or ungrateful for questioning them has changed everything. Thank you for speaking when it would have been easier to stay silent." I showed the email to Vivian, who had become my most steadfast supporter and frequent podcast guest. Her eyes filled with tears as she read it. "This is why we fought," she said simply. "Not just for your money, but for every Lily out there." Amory, who had transitioned from my therapist to my friend and occasional podcast consultant, suggested we formalize our growing community. Together, we co-founded a support group called Quiet Funds, focused on financial literacy and family manipulation recovery. What began as monthly meetings in a borrowed community center space expanded to chapters in neighboring cities, then across the state. One rainy Tuesday, I arrived home from recording a podcast episode to find a thick envelope in my mailbox. The return address was my mother's, though I hadn't heard from her since my father's sentencing for corporate fraud 6 months earlier. He had received 5 years, eligible for parole after 3, a consequence that seemed to have finally broken through my mother's elaborate defenses. The letter inside was different from her previous attempts at contact. There were no tear stains, no dramatic declarations, no elaborate excuses. Instead, there was a simple, direct accounting of her actions over the years, not just with me, but with others in the family. She admitted to jealousy of Vivian's relationship with me, to resentment of my academic success, to deliberate isolation tactics designed to keep me dependent. "I won't ask for forgiveness," she wrote toward the end. "I don't deserve it, and requesting it would be another form of emotional manipulation. I only want you to know that I see clearly now what I've done, and I'm working with a therapist who specializes in narcissistic behavior patterns. Whether you ever want contact with me again is entirely your choice, and I will respect whatever boundaries you set. That evening, I built another fire in my small backyard. I had purchased a modest house near Vivian's the previous spring. This time, as I placed the letter on the flames, the feeling wasn't of anger or finality, but of quiet closure. That chapter of my life was truly finished. Vivian joined me on the porch afterward, wrapping a quilt around both our shoulders as we watched the embers die down. "Are you sad?" she asked, studying my expression. I considered the question carefully. Not sad exactly, just aware of what could have been in another reality where they made different choices. "You've built something remarkable from the ashes," Vivian said, gesturing toward my home, my life, the community we'd created. Something honest. The following week, I received an invitation to speak at a national conference on family financial ethics. The keynote address would be delivered to financial advisors, estate planners, and family counselors, professionals who could help identify and prevent situations like mine. As I prepared my speech, I reflected on the journey from that graduation dinner to the present moment. The money had been recovered, the legal battle won, but the real victory was in the reclaiming of my narrative and in helping others reclaim theirs. Vivian insisted on being in the front row for my address, her silver hair elegantly styled, her eyes bright with unshed tears as I took the podium. At 83, she had become not just my grandmother, but my closest friend, co-conspirator, and most trusted advisor. "Financial abuse within families persists because we don't name it," I began, surveying the room of professionals. "We excuse it as protection, dismiss it as misunderstanding, or hide it out of shame. But naming it is the first step toward healing, both for individuals and for our communities." For 40 minutes, I spoke about red flags, intervention points, and the crucial role of neutral financial advocates for young adults. I shared anonymized stories from podcast listeners and support group members, highlighting the patterns that transcended socioeconomic backgrounds and family structures. "The money itself is often secondary to the control it represents," I explained. "The psychological impact of being made to feel like a burden, of having your autonomy systematically undermined, extends far beyond the financial loss. Recovery requires not just restitution, but recognition. The acknowledgement that what happened was real and wrong." After the applause died down and the formal Q&A ended, a line formed of people wanting to speak with me privately. Among them was an older gentleman with kind eyes and a gentle manner. "My daughter stopped speaking to me 5 years ago," he confided. "After listening to your podcast, I realized I'd been using financial support to control her choices, where she lived, what she studied, who she dated. I never saw it as manipulation until I heard you describe your experience." He paused, blinking back tears. "I've started therapy. I sent her a letter apologizing without expectations. I don't know if she'll ever forgive me, but for the first time, I understand why she needed to walk away." Later that night, in the quiet of my hotel room, I called Vivian to share the day's events. "You've created something important," she said, pride evident in her voice. "Something that will outlast both of us." "We created it," I corrected her. "I couldn't have done any of this without you." "You would have found your way eventually," Vivian insisted. "You always had that strength inside you." As we said goodnight, I thought about the frightened, confused young woman I'd been at that graduation dinner. Believing herself a burden, unaware of her own worth, isolated by careful design. The journey from that moment to this one had been painful but necessary. I opened my laptop and began typing the introduction to the book I'd been considering for months. I didn't lose a family that day at my graduation dinner. I found the courage to build a real one. One founded on honesty instead of manipulation, on support instead of control, on love instead of fear. This is that story. The cursor blinked on the screen, steady and patient, waiting for the words that would transform private pain into public purpose. Outside my window, the city lights twinkled like stars, each one representing a life connected to countless others through invisible threads of influence and care. Somewhere out there were people still trapped in silence, still questioning their own perceptions, still believing themselves unworthy of basic dignity. For them, I would keep speaking. For them, I would continue turning inheritance into advocacy. For them, and for the young woman I once was, I would make sure the silence ended here. This story was a journey through betrayal, but it ultimately became about finding my voice and helping others find theirs. What would you have done in my place? Have you ever faced a moment where you realized your reality was built on a lie? Tell me what you think in the comments below. I really want to hear your stories. If this resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share for more powerful narratives that explore the shadows within families and the courage it takes to step into the light.